Perfect. Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing and putting out all that information. I think it's really important for everyone to understand the lay of the land and understanding, what numbers are known, how this impacts Indigenous communities and who's out there on the forefront, really working to make a difference. And so I want to be able to bring this back to our Haudenosaunee Confederacy, speaking from our perspective, and whose lands we've acknowledged today that our presentation is being presented from out of the University of Rochester. So with that, what I wanted to do was to sort of kind of back up even further to be able to contextualize the history and understanding how did we get to where we're at today. So I think it's very important to understand our women leadership. I can't necessarily speak for all Indigenous peoples across the Americas, but I know among our Haudenosaunee Confederacy and a lot of the nations, on the East Coast where Europeans first came into contact with, that women were and still are leaders among our nations. As you can see, we're very honored today to have our Bear Clan mother with us. And what's important to understand in regard to that women's leadership is the power and authority that our women have, in particular as it relates to the land. And when we're looking at European settlement, what was the primary goal was to be able to claim lands in the name of the crowns and the countries from Europe. And it turned out to be throughout time, and this really isn't talked about in the mainstream histories, that Indigenous women are really the primary ones who have been, or and historically were, the ones in the way of that expansion because of the fact that we had and have final say over the lands. So within and among our women leadership, and in particular among our Haudenosaunee, our clan mothers have absolute authority over our economies. Women have control over the economies, which would be our food, our fields of corn. In addition to that, our clan mothers would be the ones who would choose the leadership among our nations. And that's really important to understand because they also have the right to take away that leadership. So when you look at what's the authority of women among the nations, it's really quite powerful, and it dates back very far within our cultures. In addition to that, women have always had full autonomy over our bodies, our children, our homes, and our lands. So as you can see, there was a lot of authority, lots of power that was there and that is still there today. But our histories and this clashing of differences has really caused this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls to really rise to the level where it's at today. And I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to be able to talk about this and to give voice to this, because it really has been just among the communities, like Amy has expressed, that it's been really hard to keep track of these cases that come up, and the evidence is right over time. So so the first picture that I had showed to you was one of our first women who we call the Mother of Nations. And our Haudenosaunee Confederacy was formed about 1,000 years ago, or a little over 1,000 years ago. And that first woman that you saw, her name was Jigonsase. And her name carried on with a title that continued throughout the years. And in the 1850s, this is the last woman who we see carrying that name. And then it disappears for a very long time. And you ask what was going on, what was happening, right? And it's very much tied to the greater history of the disappearance of Indigenous women overall. So you can see even here among our Haudenosaunee Confederacy, while this may not have been, a direct type of killing, but you can see that there is a disappearance of that women's role and authority over time. So what I really like to do is to have you step back just a moment and to be able to take a look at the doctrine of discovery, right, that I had mentioned earlier. And this doctrine of discovery was issued in 1493, and that gave Christopher Columbus and all of the European explorers the right to be able to come to the Americas and lay claim to the lands that are here. They did so because it was declared then by the Pope in this papal bull that indigenous peoples of the Americas didn't have souls. We weren't Christian. And therefore, it gave European explorers the right to exploit, murder, eliminate, enslave, rape, and pillage among our peoples, and to then, claim any of the resources, to claim the lands. And while it seems that, a papal bull from 1493 may not have much bearing upon today, but in fact, it actually does. In 1843, the US Supreme Court, in one of its very early land cases, cited the doctrine of discovery as being the legal basis for title to all lands across the United States. So everywhere you stand in this country, it is the doctrine of discovery that gives Europeans, or the now Americans, the United Colonies that became the United States of America, the right to be where they are, or the claimed right to be here and to claim title to our lands, which were either stolen or was negotiated through treaty to allow Europeans to use the lands and to reside within our territories. So everybody really is on territory of indigenous peoples, either through the illegal dispossession of our lands or through rights of treaties. But then in comes the Supreme Court in 1843 using this doctrine of discovery as its legal basis. So again, 1843 seems like a long time ago. And so how does that have any bearing on today, right? Again, this case was cited in 2005 against my nation by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who cited the doctrine to basically continue along with the dispossession of Oneida lands that had been illegally taken by New York State. And the Supreme Court had previously acknowledged those illegal takings, but the Supreme Court, penned by Ginsburg, had breathed life back into this doctrine. So how does this relate to missing and murdered Indigenous women today? Well, again, knowing who really is in charge of the decisions within and among the nations of our nations is Indigenous women. And so you can see how over the course of time, this type of thinking has really perpetuated itself and built itself into the fabric and into the society of how this country views its right to be on the land. And knowing that Indigenous women are in the way, there really has been an effort over time to erase the voices of Indigenous women from histories. And that is really problematic because there has been a deliberate invisibilization of our peoples. So I ask, did you learn about this type of information, when you were in grade school? Did you learn about this type of information in college? Or is this the first time you're hearing about it, right? This is really enmeshed in the fabric of who this country is today and how it continues to move forward. And without this sense of awareness of not knowing where the country is coming from and its thinking, which perpetuates itself within the legal framework and within the educational system, it's bound to continue to repeat those types of behaviors. And so I think it's really important. There has been a lot of efforts to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, to have the church of the Catholic Church and the Pope to repudiate this doctrine. And so I wonder, what type of legal implications would happen from there. I was actually just making a presentation yesterday to some folks in Canada, and I learned that the doctrine of discovery was cited as recently as 2016 against one of the nations there in Canada. Just paying attention here to the time. I think I'm running up on my time here. But I wanted to highlight one of the films here. You can see Mama Bear and Janelle are in here. We had a community discussion about some of those fallouts that have come from this type of invisibilization of our voices. And a lot of that also is assimilation processes that were forced upon our people once genocidal acts against us didn't work, and we didn't really just vacate the lands that were proclaimed as being opened and free for the taking. There were other policies that were enacted by the governments within the US and Canada to take our children away from us, to then assimilate them into becoming white Christians. Within that process, there was lots of abuses and sexual abuses that happened within residential schools that were here in the United States and active even up until, I believe, the 1960s. Does that sound? I think it was within the 60s or even the 70s, in which some of the last ones had closed. But it really had a very big impact within our country and also within Canada. And what happens is a lot of these children were victims of abuse. And when they became older, they were really placed in situations that made our communities very prone to these cycles of violence, as a lot of the kids returned back into the homes. And we see this happening today. Even in the foster care that happens throughout the country. You can see a lot of our children are still being taken and placed into foster homes, into foster care, and then they're really kind of left in very vulnerable situations and not really given the life and the cultural upbringing and support that they need in order to be strong individuals and supported in the community. So you can see that a lot of individuals end up becoming very prone to issues such as like sex trafficking, and ultimately leading into this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. This film is free online if you wanted to go take a look at it, but I think it also helps to contextualize part of this issue that we're talking about violence today. So I'm gonna stop there and just thank you all. So we'll hand it over to Janelle or Mama Bear.